the cruel shadow of Thornwall Castle, a desperate game unfolds. A young serving girl stands trembling before hundreds of onlookers as the king commands her to mount a horse so savage it has killed 2 men. The nobles laugh, already savoring her inevitable humiliation, or worse, her death. This public execution disguised as entertainment is meant to remind everyone of their place in a world where power crushes innocence without mercy. But sometimes, fate turns on a single moment of courage. As Morella approaches the massive stallion, something extraordinary happens. A connection that defies explanation, a silent understanding between 2 souls accustomed to cruelty. What begins as a death sentence transforms into something else entirely, awakening whispers of secrets long buried in royal blood that refuses to stay hidden. Who is this simple miller's daughter who tames beasts with a touch? And why does the queen grow pale when she looks into the girl's storm-gray eyes? As ancient medallions emerge from hiding and birthmarks reveal their secrets, one question burns through the kingdom like wildfire. What if the serving girl forced to kneel before royalty has been royalty herself all along? A humiliazione publica. The summer sun beat down mercilessly upon the castle courtyard, baking the cobblestones until they shimmered with heat. Lords and ladies huddled beneath colorful canopies, fanning themselves languidly while servants scurried about with trays of chilled wine. In stark contrast, the commoners stood exposed to the elements, pressed together in a sweating mass of anticipation, all eyes fixed upon the royal dais where King Alaric reclined on his portable throne, a cruel smile playing across his thin lips. "Bring forth the serving girl." His voice cracked like a whip across the courtyard. The crowd parted as 2 guards dragged Morella forward, her simple woolen dress already soaked with perspiration and fear. She was a wisp of a thing, barely 20 summers old, with eyes the color of rain-washed stone and hair the shade of autumn wheat. The daughter of a miller who had died owing taxes to the crown, she had been forced into service at the castle, where her quiet dignity had somehow caught the king's malevolent attention. "Your Majesty," she whispered, keeping her gaze fixed upon the ground as she had been taught. King Alaric rose from his seat, his jewel-encrusted fingers gripping a golden goblet. Wine sloshed over its rim as he gestured wildly toward the far end of the courtyard. "Tell me, girl," he called out loudly enough for all to hear, "do you see that beast?" Every head turned. In a hastily constructed pen stood a magnificent stallion, coat as black as midnight, nostrils flaring with rage, powerful hooves pawing at the earth. Even from a distance, Morella could see the madness in its rolling eyes. 3 stable masters struggled to hold its reins as it reared and bucked, sending clouds of dust billowing into the air. "Thunder's fury," someone whispered behind her. "The devil horse. Killed 2 men already." Morella's heart thundered against her ribs as understanding dawned. The king's next words confirmed her worst fears. "My finest knights have failed to tame this creature," Alaric announced, his voice laced with malicious delight. "Yet I find myself wondering if perhaps we've been approaching this challenge incorrectly." He fixed Morella with a stare that froze her blood. "Perhaps what this beast requires is not strength, but—" He paused dramatically, a woman's touch. Laughter rippled through the crowd of nobles. Lady Eleonora, the king's cousin, nearly choked on her wine. "Surely your Majesty jests," she exclaimed, dabbing at her lips with an embroidered handkerchief. "The girl will be trampled before she takes 2 steps." "Nevertheless," the king replied, his eyes never leaving Morella's face, "I command it. Mount the beast, girl. Show us your talents." Morella felt her legs begin to tremble. She had grown up around horses. Her father's mill had kept 2 old mares. But this was different. This was murder disguised as entertainment. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice barely audible, "I beg your mercy." "Mount the horse." Each word fell like a stone. "Or shall I visit your sisters in the village instead? I understand the youngest is quite pretty." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Morella's hands curled into fists at her sides, her fingernails cutting half-moons into her palms. She thought of 12-year-old Lily with her gap-toothed smile, and of Mama, already bent with grief since father's death. "As you command, sire," she whispered. The walk across the courtyard felt endless. Each step brought her closer to certain death, yet Morella held her head high. If this was to be her end, she would meet it with dignity. The whispers followed her like shadows, some mocking, others pitying. Poor little dove. She'll break like kindling. The king has gone too far this time. Thunder's fury sensed her approach and reared violently, his massive hooves slicing through the air. The stable masters struggled to control him, sweat pouring down their strained faces. One of them, a kind old man named Gareth, who had sometimes slipped Morella extra bread from the kitchens, looked at her with abject horror. "Child," he hissed, "this beast is the devil himself. Run while you still can." But there was nowhere to run. Not with the king's guards at every exit, not with her family's safety hanging in the balance. "Let me approach him," Morella said, her voice steadier than she felt. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for the spectacle. Someone in the back row had already started taking wagers on how long she would last. 30 seconds was the most generous estimate. Lady Eleanora whispered something to her companion, and both women dissolved into laughter that sounded like breaking glass. Morella closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath that smelled of dust and horse and fear. Then she stepped forward. "Easy now," she murmured. Not to the horse, but to herself. Easy. To everyone's astonishment, she didn't immediately approach Thunder's fury. Instead, she stood perfectly still, just outside his reach. She made no sudden movements, no attempts to grab his reins. She simply waited, eyes locked with the great beast's wild gaze. A minute passed, then another. The courtyard grew unnaturally quiet. "What is she waiting for?" someone muttered. "Get on with it," shouted another. But Morella had lived her entire life being invisible to the powerful. She had learned patience in the hardest of schools. Now she simply stood, breathing slowly, steadily, waiting for the stallion to exhaust his initial rage. Gradually, imperceptibly, something changed. Thunder's fury's violent movements began to slow. His ears, previously flattened against his skull, flickered forward. His nostrils still flared, but his breathing became less frantic. "Impossible," whispered Gareth. Only then did Morella begin to speak, softly, so that only the horse could hear her words. "I know what it's like," she told him, "to be forced to perform for their amusement, to be beaten when you refuse to submit. We're not so different, you and I." She took one step forward. Thunder's fury snorted but didn't rear. Another step. The horse's muscles bunched beneath his gleaming coat, but he remained in place. A third step brought her within touching distance. Slowly, ever so slowly, Morella raised her hand, not toward his head or his reins, but toward his heaving flank. Her palm made contact with his hot, sweaty hide, and a collective gasp rose from the crowd. For one breathless moment, time seemed suspended. Then Thunder's fury shuddered beneath her touch, not in rage, but in something that looked remarkably like surrender. Without harness or saddle, using only the fence rail for leverage, Morella lifted herself onto the stallion's broad back. Her simple dress hiked up around her knees, revealing legs scratched and bruised from hard labor. She cared not for modesty now, only for balance and survival. The world held its breath as girl and horse became a single silhouette against the summer sky. Then, miracle of miracles, Thunder's fury began to move, not in the violent bucks and kicks everyone expected, but in a smooth, controlled circle around the pen. His gait was proud, almost regal, as if he understood that this was a moment of defiance for them both. The king's face had gone white with fury. His knuckles blanched around his goblet, and for a moment it seemed he might shatter the gold with his bare hands. The nobles had fallen completely silent. Even Lady Eleanora's perpetual smirk had vanished, replaced by an expression of reluctant wonder. But from the common folk came a different response. It began as a murmur, then swelled into a cheer that echoed off the castle walls. Farmhands and merchants, cooks and blacksmiths, people who had known humiliation and hardship, recognized something in Morella that transcended her station. As she guided Thunder's fury in a second, more elaborate circuit of the pen, Morella allowed herself a small, secret smile. She had expected to die today. Instead, she had found an unexpected ally in this magnificent creature who, like her, refused to be broken. Among the ladies of the court, however, a different conversation was brewing. Lady Eleanora leaned close to the Duchess of Westmere, her painted lips barely moving as she whispered, "This can only mean one thing. She is no ordinary servant girl." The Duchess nodded, her shrewd eyes narrowing as she studied Morella's face with new interest. "Indeed, and if my suspicions are correct, our dear king has made a terrible mistake bringing her into the light." Their whispers spread like poison through the court, sowing seeds of conspiracy that would soon grow into something none of them could control. O susurro da corte. The morning after Morella's unexpected triumph dawned crisp and clear, but the air inside Thornwall Castle hung heavy with whispers. Servants who had previously brushed past her without a glance now paused mid-task, eyes lingering on her face with newfound curiosity. As she carried breakfast trays through the winding stone corridors, fragments of hushed conversations reached her ears. "They say she has the old magic in her blood," murmured a scullery maid to her companion, their voices dropping even lower as Morella approached. "Nonsense," replied the other, though her eyes betrayed her fascination. "It's royal blood, mark my words. Did you not notice how she sits, straight as a queen, even when scrubbing floors?" Morella kept her gaze fixed on the flagstones beneath her feet, pretending not to hear. Her hands, red and chapped from lye soap, trembled slightly beneath the weight of the silver tray. Yesterday's events still seemed dreamlike. Had she truly tamed Thunder's fury? The memory of his powerful body yielding to her touch felt more like a tale from a minstrel's song than her own experience. In the great hall, the atmosphere shifted like quicksand. Lady Eleanora sat at the high table, picking delicately at a platter of sugared fruits. Her eyes, sharp as a falcon's, tracked Morella's movements across the room. When the serving girl approached to refill her goblet, Eleanora's pale fingers shot out to grasp her wrist. "Tell me, girl," she said, voice dripping with honeyed venom. "Where exactly did you say you were born?" "Oakvale Village, my lady," Morella replied softly, eyes downcast as protocol demanded. "My father was the miller there until his passing last winter." Lady Eleanora's painted lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. "How curious. I seem to recall a rather different story circulating about a child who vanished from court some 18 years ago. A child with eyes precisely that shade of gray." Morella's heart fluttered like a trapped bird. "You are mistaken, my lady. I have never set foot inside a castle until I was brought here to serve." "Perhaps." Eleanora released her grip, leaving white fingerprints on Morella's skin that slowly bloomed red. "But mistakes have a way of revealing themselves, don't they?" By midday, the whispers had spilled beyond the castle walls and into the village marketplace. Morella felt their weight as she ventured out to purchase herbs for the head cook. The usual bustle of commerce, the hammering of the blacksmith, the calls of merchants hawking their wares, the bleating of goats being led to slaughter, all seemed to diminish as she passed. At the herbalist's stall, old Widow Thorne pressed a sprig of rowan into Morella's hand alongside the rosemary she had requested. "For protection, child," the crone whispered, her rheumy eyes darting nervously toward the castle that loomed on the hillside above them. "There's those who won't take kindly to what you did yesterday." "I don't understand," Morella protested, trying to return the protective herb. "I only did as I was commanded." The widow shook her head, silver braids swinging. "There's noble blood that's run thin over generations, and there's blood that remembers its strength. Yours remembers, girl. They all saw it." Near the village well, a cluster of gray-bearded men fell silent as she approached. One, a stooped figure leaning heavily on a gnarled staff, regarded her with watery blue eyes that seemed to peer straight through her ordinary appearance to something hidden beneath. "She has her mother's chin," he muttered to his companions, "and the way she carries herself, just like Lady Rosalind before the fever took her." "Hush, Edmund," hissed another, casting a nervous glance toward the castle. "Those are dangerous words, even after all these years." But the old man continued, his voice gaining strength. "I remember when the announcement came that the babe had died in the night. Convenient that was. Too convenient by half, especially with those rumors about the king's younger brother and the lady." Their voices faded as Morella hurried past, her cheeks burning. This madness had to stop. She was no lost noble child, just a miller's daughter with calloused hands and simple dreams. Her mother had been a village woman through and through, with no connection to courts or kings. These tales would only bring danger to her door, especially with the king already humiliated by yesterday's events. Back at the castle, she found an unusual stillness in the servants' quarters. Beds that should have been hastily made stood untouched. The usual clatter of pots from the kitchen was absent. Following the eerie silence, Morella discovered the entire household staff crowded into the lower hall, listening rapt as Tobias, a manservant who attended the king's private chambers, held court. "The portrait hangs in the east gallery," he was saying, his voice hushed yet carrying to every corner of the room. "Lady Rosalind with her infant daughter. The resemblance is unmistakable." Heads turned as Morella entered, and for one terrible moment she thought they might bow to her. Instead, they parted like water, creating a path to where Agnes, the oldest of the chambermaids, sat clutching something to her chest. "Show her, Agnes," someone urged. "She has the right to know." The elderly woman's hands shook as she extended a small object wrapped in faded linen. "I've kept it safe all these years," she whispered, waiting for the right moment. With reluctant fingers, Morella unwrapped the cloth to reveal a child's rattle carved from silver. Delicate engravings covered its surface. Roses and thorns intertwined around a noble crest she didn't recognize. "It was in your swaddling clothes when they brought you to the miller's cottage," Agnes said, tears gathering in her rheumy eyes. "I was there that night. I helped carry you away." The room swam before Morella's eyes. "No," she said firmly, rewrapping the rattle and thrusting it back into Agnes's hands. "You're mistaken. All of you. These fantasies will only bring the king's wrath down upon us all." But even as she spoke, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. Horses' hooves clattered on cobblestones, and urgent voices called for mounts to be saddled. Through the narrow window, Morella glimpsed Bran, the king's most trusted manservant, slipping away from the main gates on a swift gray palfrey. "He's been sent to search the archives in the abbey," whispered a kitchen boy who had raced up from below. "The king demands proof of the miller's daughter's birth." A cold dread settled in Morella's stomach. Whatever mad fancy had seized the castle, it had reached the king himself. The same king who had tried to humiliate her before his court now sought to unravel her very identity. As twilight descended, Morella found herself alone in the small herb garden behind the kitchens. Here, at least, the plants demanded nothing of her but the simple labor of weeding and watering. Rosemary and thyme released their soothing scents as her fingers worked the soil, grounding her in the present moment. A soft footfall behind her broke her reverie. Turning, she found herself face to face with Edwin, a gangly youth who served as apprentice to the royal record keeper. His freckled face was flushed with excitement or fear, perhaps both. "I found something," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "In the old records." A letter, sealed with the royal crest, dated 18 years past. He pulled a folded parchment from inside his jerkin, hands trembling. It mentions a child of noble birth, secretly fostered with a trusted subject after her mother's death. "The details match your story, Morella. The village, the miller, even the month of your birth." Morella stared at the document, its elegant script swimming before her eyes. This couldn't be happening. She was nobody, just a serving girl with dirt beneath her fingernails and calluses on her palms. Whatever game the court was playing, she wanted no part in it. "Destroy it," she urged, pushing the parchment back toward Edwin. "Burn it before someone sees." The boy's eyes widened. "I cannot. The record keeper would have my head. Besides..." He hesitated, lowering his voice further. "There are rumors that someone from the royal family already suspects the truth. This document might be the only thing that can protect you." As darkness fell completely, a page boy arrived with a message that turned Morella's blood to ice. By royal command, she was to present herself in the great hall as soon as the evening bells tolled. The king himself would address the matter that had set the entire castle abuzz. The bells began to ring, their solemn tones echoing across the moonlit courtyard. 1, 2, 3. Each peal brought Morella closer to a confrontation she had never sought and could not avoid. Whatever awaited her in that hall would forever change the course of her life. O Banquet de Olares. The great hall of Thornwall Castle blazed with light. Hundreds of beeswax candles flickered in ornate wall sconces and massive iron chandeliers, their golden glow reflecting off polished silver plates and jewel-encrusted goblets. Tapestries depicting ancient battles and royal hunts adorned the stone walls, their rich colors lending warmth to the cavernous space. The air hung heavy with the mingled scents of roasted meats, spiced wine, and the cloying perfumes favored by court ladies. Morella stood in the shadows of a servant's alcove, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had been given no time to change from her simple work dress, though someone, Agnes perhaps, had pressed a clean apron into her hands and helped her smooth her hair. Now, as she watched nobles and dignitaries file into the hall in their silks and velvets, she felt more out of place than ever. "You there, girl?" The head steward's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "The king has commanded that you serve his table tonight." "The royal table, mind you. Don't spill a drop, or it'll be the stocks for you." Morella nodded wordlessly, accepting the heavy silver pitcher of wine he thrust into her hands. The weight of it was nothing compared to the burden of countless eyes that would soon be upon her. The trumpet sounded, announcing the royal family's entrance. King Alaric strode in first, his crimson mantle sweeping behind him, the golden crown glinting atop his silver-streaked dark hair. His face, handsome despite the years, was set in lines of stern authority. Queen Matilda followed, her slim figure wrapped in midnight blue silk, her famously beautiful face a frozen mask that revealed nothing of her thoughts. Behind them walked Prince Edward, tall and lean like his father, but with a gentler cast to his features. His eyes, a startling clear blue, seemed to take in everything at once. As the nobles bowed and curtsied, Morella pressed herself deeper into the alcove, desperately wishing to become invisible once more. But invisibility, it seemed, was no longer her fate. "The serving girl," the king announced, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the assembled court. "Bring her forward." The steward's bony fingers closed around Morella's arm, propelling her into the light. The pitcher trembled in her grasp as she approached the high table and sank into a deep curtsy. "Your Majesties," she murmured, eyes fixed on the rushes covering the floor. "Look up, girl," the king commanded. Slowly, reluctantly, Morella raised her gaze to meet his. Something flickered in the king's expression, something that might have been recognition, quickly masked by imperious disdain. "You will serve the wine tonight," he declared, loud enough for all to hear. "Let us see if your hands are as steady with a pitcher as they were with my untamable horse." A ripple of laughter swept through the court, though it held more nervousness than mirth. The events of yesterday still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. "Begin with the queen," the king added, his lips curling into what might have been a smile. Morella approached Queen Matilda, whose slender fingers were wrapped around an empty goblet. As she leaned forward to pour, the queen's voice, low and melodic but edged with steel, reached her ears alone. "They say you have her eyes," the queen whispered, "gray as storm clouds. How very convenient." The wine nearly sloshed over the rim as Morella's hand jerked slightly. "I know not what you mean, your Majesty. Don't you?" The queen's smile was a masterpiece of courtly artifice. "Perhaps by the end of this evening, we shall all know exactly who you are." Moving down the table, Morella filled glass after glass, acutely aware of the scrutiny she faced. Lords examined her features with undisguised curiosity. Ladies whispered behind jeweled hands, their eyes darting between her face and the faded portrait of Lady Rosalind that hung at the far end of the hall. "She has the Thornwall chin," one elderly baron remarked to his companion, making no effort to lower his voice. "And the way she carries herself," added a countess in emerald silk. "One cannot teach such natural grace to a commoner." Each comment fell like a physical blow. Morella struggled to keep her composure, focusing on the simple task of pouring wine without spilling a drop. When she reached Prince Edward, she braced herself for another cutting remark or probing question. Instead, he simply nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than accusatory. "Thank you," he said quietly, as if she were any ordinary servant and not the center of a growing storm. The simple courtesy almost undid her. As the feast progressed through 7 sumptuous courses, Morella moved back and forth from the high table to the sideboard where fresh pitchers waited, The heat from hundreds of candles and packed bodies made the air stifling. Sweat trickled down her back, and her arms ached from the weight of the silver vessels. During the fourth course, peacock dressed in its own feathers, Lady Eleanor rose to offer a toast. "To our beloved king," she proclaimed, raising her goblet high, "who has provided us with such unexpected entertainment of late." Her gaze slid meaningfully to Morella. How fortunate that hidden talents and hidden bloodlines are being brought to light in our midst. Queen Matilda's face tightened almost imperceptibly. The king's knuckles whitened around his knife handle. "Perhaps," Lady Eleanor continued, her voice honeyed with malice, "our gracious sovereign might favor us with a demonstration of his legendary horsemanship tomorrow. Or shall we ask the miller's daughter to show us all how it's done?" A dangerous silence fell across the hall. Then, quite suddenly, it was shattered by a crash. Morella stood frozen in horror, staring at the goblet she had just dropped. Ruby-red wine spread across the flagstones like blood, seeping into the fresh rushes. The silver cup rolled in a lazy circle, its ringing echo fading into the stunned quiet. At that precise moment, from the stables outside came the unmistakable sound of thunder's fury. The stallion's shrill neigh penetrated the thick stone walls, as if in answer to the fallen cup's metallic song. The coincidence was too perfect, too eerie. Dozens of pairs of eyes swiveled from Morella to the windows and back again. Someone made the sign against evil. Someone else whispered a prayer. I beg your forgiveness, Your Majesty," Morella stammered, dropping to her knees to retrieve the cup, heedless of the wine staining her skirts. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then, just as the king opened his mouth to speak, Prince Edward rose from his seat and knelt beside her. "Allow me," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed hall as he helped gather the scattered droplets with a linen napkin. Gasps and murmurs erupted around them. A prince of the realm, on his knees beside a serving girl. It was unprecedented, shocking, and to some observers, deeply significant. "What mean you by this display, my son?" the king demanded, his face darkening with anger. Prince Edward stood, helping Morella to her feet with a steady hand. "Only that accidents befall us all, father, regardless of birth or station, and that a little kindness costs nothing." The implication hung in the air, that the king himself might benefit from such a philosophy. A muscle worked in Alaric's jaw as he stared at his son. "Indeed," he finally replied, his voice dangerously soft. "Yet one must be careful. Kindness offered to the wrong person can be mistaken for something else entirely." Lady Eleanor's tinkling laugh broke the tension. "How charmingly gallant our prince has become. One might almost suspect him of harboring tender feelings for our mysterious serving maid." Fresh whispers swept through the assembly. Queen Matilda's face had gone absolutely still, her blue eyes cold as winter ice. Morella felt the blood drain from her own cheeks. This was spiraling beyond her control, gathering momentum like a boulder rolling downhill. "Enough of this foolishness," the king declared, rising to his feet. The jewels in his crown caught the candlelight, sending prisms of color dancing across the walls. "Tomorrow, I shall put an end to these wild speculations once and for all." His gaze swept over the assembled court before coming to rest on Morella's face. Something in his expression made her blood run cold. "Tomorrow, before the full court and all who wish to witness," he announced, "I shall reveal the truth about this girl who has caused such a commotion in our midst. Let it be known that King Alaric of Thornwall tolerates neither deception nor pretenders to royal blood." A collective intake of breath swept through the hall. The queen's goblet trembled slightly in her grasp. Prince Edward's jaw tightened, his blue eyes flashing with something that might have been defiance. And through it all, Morella stood transfixed, the empty pitcher clutched against her chest like a shield. Whatever game the court was playing, she had suddenly become the central piece. A pawn elevated to unexpected prominence on the royal chessboard. But pawns, she knew all too well, were often sacrificed without a second thought. As the feast concluded and the nobles began to disperse, Prince Edward brushed past her, his voice pitched low for her ears alone. "Meet me in the North Tower at midnight," he murmured. There are things you must know before tomorrow." Before she could respond, he was gone, swallowed by the swirling crowd of courtiers. Morella remained rooted to the spot, the weight of his words pressing upon her like a physical burden. Outside, thunder's fury neighed once more, a sound of warning or welcome, she could not tell. As Marcus du Passado. Dawn broke over Thornwall Castle like a whispered secret, pale fingers of light caressing ancient stone. Morella had barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the midnight meeting with Prince Edward. He had shown her old maps of hidden passages within the castle walls, pressed a small iron key into her palm, and warned her in urgent tones to be ready to flee should the king's revelation prove dangerous. His blue eyes had been troubled as he'd told her. "My father values his pride above all else. He will not suffer any threat to his authority, real or perceived." Now, as the first rays of sunlight spilled through the narrow window of the servants' quarters, Morella stiffened at the sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor. The door burst open without ceremony, revealing two of the king's personal guards in polished breastplates bearing the royal crest. "The king commands your presence," announced the taller guard, his face impassive. "Now." No time was given to straighten her rumpled dress or splash water on her face. Flanked by the silent guards, Morella was marched through corridors still quiet with early morning emptiness. Rather than heading toward the great hall or the throne room, however, they led her down a spiraling staircase she had never noticed before, descending deep into the heart of the castle. The air grew cooler, heavier with the scent of old parchment and forgotten secrets. Torches guttered in iron sconces, their dancing flames casting grotesque shadows across walls of bare stone. After what seemed an eternity of descent, they arrived at a heavy oak door reinforced with bands of tarnished metal. One guard produced an ornate key, and the ancient lock surrendered with a reluctant groan. Inside lay a chamber unlike any Morella had seen in her months of service. Where the rest of the castle boasted tapestries and polished wood, this room was austere, devoted entirely to the preservation of knowledge. Shelves lined the walls from floor to vaulted ceiling, sagging beneath the weight of leather-bound tomes and scrolls tied with faded ribbons. Glass-fronted cabinets protected delicate objects, a tarnished crown too small for an adult head, a collection of seals in various metals, miniature portraits in frames of ivory and gold. In the center of this repository of royal memory stood King Alaric, his back to the door, examining a yellowed parchment spread across a massive oak table. The queen sat nearby, her slender fingers idly tracing patterns on the carved armrest of her chair. Her face, beautiful even in repose, betrayed nothing of her thoughts. The king turned at their entrance, his eyes calculating as they fell upon Morella. Without the crown and formal robes of state, he appeared almost ordinary. A man in his middle years with threads of silver in his dark hair and lines of care etched around his mouth. Yet power clung to him like a second skin, undimmed by the simple tunic and breeches he wore. "Leave us," he commanded the guards, who bowed and retreated, closing the heavy door behind them. Silence expanded to fill the chamber. Morella stood with downcast eyes, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance and the tremor in her hands that she couldn't quite control. "Do you know why you've been brought here, girl?" The king's voice was surprisingly soft, almost contemplative. "No, your majesty. This is the royal archive," he continued, gesturing to the shelves around them. "Every birth, death, marriage, and significant event in the history of Thornwall is recorded here. Nothing happens in my kingdom that is not eventually committed to these pages." He picked up a small silver object from the table, a medallion of some sort, hanging from a tarnished chain. 18 years ago, my brother's wife died in childbed. The infant, a girl, survived only long enough to be blessed by the royal chaplain before following her mother to the grave. Or so the official records state. Queen Matilda shifted in her chair, the rustle of her silk gown unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Rumors persisted, however. The king continued, turning the medallion over in his palm. Whispers that the child had not died at all, but had been spirited away to protect her from certain influences at court. I dismissed such talk as the idle gossip of servants with too little work and too much imagination. His eyes lifted to Morella's face. Until now. Heart pounding, Morella found her voice. "Forgive me, your majesty, but what has this to do with me?" I am a miller's daughter from Oakvale. Are you? The king's mouth curved in a humorless smile. Then you would have no objection to satisfying my curiosity on one small matter? Without waiting for her response, he gestured toward a screen of carved wood in the corner of the chamber. Remove your dress and show me your left shoulder. Blood rushed to Morella's cheeks. Your Majesty, The Queen will verify what I need to see, he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. This need not be improper. Queen Matilda rose with fluid grace, her ice-blue eyes unreadable as she guided Morella behind the screen. With trembling fingers, the girl loosened the ties of her simple dress, allowing it to fall just enough to expose her left shoulder. A small intake of breath from the Queen was the only indication of what she had discovered. Well, called the king from beyond the screen. Queen Matilda's cool fingers traced the outline of the mark on Morella's skin, a crescent-shaped birthmark, pale against her sun-browned shoulder. It is as you suspected, she replied, her voice carefully neutral. She bears the mark. Morella hastily retied her dress, confusion warring with a growing sense of dread. What does this mean? The Queen merely shook her head and led her back to where the king waited, his face now drained of color. Every female child born to the royal line of Thornwall for 7 generations has borne that mark, he said flatly, including my brother's wife and their daughter. The room seemed to tilt beneath Morella's feet. There must be some mistake, she whispered. My mother was Anna, wife to Miller Thomas of Oakvale. I have sisters. Foster sisters, perhaps. The king's voice was like iron. But you are no miller's get. The blood of kings runs in your veins, girl. My brother's blood. His mouth twisted. Blood that some might consider more rightful to the throne than my own. Understanding dawned like a winter sunrise, cold and clear and terrifying. If what he claimed was true, she was not merely noble by birth, but royal, a potential threat to the king's authority. I want nothing of thrones or titles, Morella said desperately. I've never sought such things. Perhaps not consciously. The king turned away, pacing between the laden shelves. Yet you captured the attention of my court with one act of defiance. The common folk already whisper that you possess some mystical connection to beasts. The nobles search your features for traces of my brother's bloodline, and find them. His voice hardened. Even my own son appears captivated by you. Queen Matilda spoke for the first time directly to Morella, her melodic voice edged with warning. What the king is trying to explain, girl, is that your existence presents certain complications. I'll leave, Morella offered quickly. Tonight, I'll go far from Thornwall, where none will ever hear of me again. The king laughed without humor, and become a rallying point for every malcontent and ambitious noble who wishes to challenge my rule. No, what's done cannot be undone. Your blood is what it is. He approached her slowly, the silver medallion dangling from his fingers. Upon closer inspection, Morella could see it bore the same crest as the royal standard, a falcon grasping a sword in its talons. This belonged to your mother. She wore it until the day she died. Morella stared at the medallion, feeling nothing but confusion and fear. No memories stirred, no sense of recognition. If what you say is true, why was I sent away? Why claim I had died? A look passed between king and queen, swift, laden with unspoken meaning. Politics, the queen answered smoothly. The realm was unstable. Your mother died in suspicious circumstances. Keeping you safe meant keeping you hidden. But something in her tone rang false, and Morella suddenly understood with perfect clarity. They were lying. Whatever the truth of her birth, there was more to this story than they were willing to reveal. What will happen to me now? She asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. King Alaric's face was a study in careful calculation. That depends. I could acknowledge you publicly as my brother's daughter, a princess of Thornwall, restored to her rightful place. Hope flared briefly in Morella's chest, only to be extinguished by his next words. Or I could declare you an impostor, a serving girl with delusions of grandeur who forged the royal birthmark to advance herself. His eyes were cold. The penalty for such treason would be severe. You would execute me for a crime I didn't commit? Morella whispered, horror spreading through her like poison. The king does what necessity demands. Queen Matilda interjected softly. For the good of the realm. The weight of their words pressed upon Morella like a physical burden. They were offering her a choice that was no choice at all, except their version of her identity, allowing them to control the narrative completely, or face punishment for daring to exist. "The court awaits my pronouncement," said the king, moving toward the heavy door. "By midday, all will know either of the miraculous return of Princess Mirabella of Thornwall, or the execution of a treasonous serving girl." As they emerged from the archive into the gradually awakening castle, servants and early-rising nobles stopped to stare. Word of the king's private meeting with the mysterious horse-tamer had evidently spread already. Morella felt their gazes like physical touches, probing and assessing. In the central courtyard, a crowd had begun to gather. Morella glimpsed Prince Edward among them, his face taut with concern. And beyond him, carried by the morning breeze, came the sound of voices. Not just the usual murmurs of castle life, but something larger, more insistent. "The people demand answers," Queen Matilda observed dispassionately. "Your fame has spread further than you know, girl." King Alaric's jaw tightened as he surveyed the growing assembly. "The rabble grows bold," he muttered. "This must be settled today, before it grows beyond control." As if on cue, a breathless messenger arrived, dropping to one knee before the king. "Your Majesty, there's a disturbance at the main gates. Villagers from miles around are gathering, asking to witness the proclamation about the girl who tamed Thunder's fury. Some are calling her the lost princess already." The king's face darkened like a thundercloud. Without another word, he strode toward the throne room, leaving Morella to follow in his wake, her future hanging by the slenderest of threads. O jogo de traições. Thornwall Castle's great hall had never seemed so vast and imposing as it did that morning. Hundreds of candles blazed despite the daylight streaming through tall windows, casting a golden glow upon the assembled court. Nobles jostled for position, their jewel-encrusted finery creating a sea of shimmering color. Guards in polished armor lined the walls, their expressions impassive, but their hands resting cautiously on sword hilts. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a blade. Morella stood at the center of it all, painfully aware of her simple dress and unbound hair. She had been positioned at the foot of the dais where the royal thrones waited, empty as yet, a spectacle for all to examine and judge. The whispers that had plagued the castle for days now reached a crescendo, swirling around her like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. "Look how she holds herself." The spitting image of Lady Rosalind. "My cousin was midwife to the Queen's sister-in-law, and she swore the child never died." A trumpet blast silenced the chatter. King Alaric and Queen Matilda entered in full regalia, crowns glinting atop their heads, ceremonial robes trailing behind them. Prince Edward followed a respectful 3 paces behind, his face carefully composed, though his eyes found Morella's briefly, conveying a warning she couldn't quite decipher. As the royal family took their places upon the dais, the great doors at the rear of the hall opened once more. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly as a stooped figure entered, supported by 2 young acolytes in the brown robes of the Abbey of St. Clement. The newcomer wore the simple garb of a monk, but the golden chain of office around his neck identified him as no ordinary brother. "The royal chronicler," someone whispered reverently. "They've summoned old brother Malcolm from the abbey." The ancient monk shuffled forward, his rheumy eyes squinting in the bright light of the hall. In his gnarled hands he clutched a weathered leather pouch. The crowd parted before him like water, many bowing their heads in respect for the keeper of the kingdom's most sacred records. King Alaric rose from his throne, extending a hand toward the elderly cleric. "Brother Malcolm," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "You honor us with your presence. Have you brought what I requested?" Brother Malcolm's voice, when it came, was surprisingly strong for one who appeared so frail. "I have, Your Majesty, though I confess, disturbing such secrets after all these years gives me little pleasure." A murmur swept through the court. The king's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, before he gestured toward a large oak table that had been positioned near the center of the hall. "Show us what you have found," he commanded. With trembling hands, Brother Malcolm withdrew a rolled parchment from his pouch and carefully spread it upon the table. The aged vellum crackled as it was unfurled, revealing elaborate script and an impressive array of wax seals. The birth record of Lady Rosalind's child, the chronicler announced, his finger tracing the faded ink. Born in the year of our Lord 1176, on the eve of Michaelmas, a daughter, christened Mirabella Eleonora Thornwall. Queen Matilda's hand tightened visibly on the armrest of her throne. The king remained impassive, though a muscle jumped in his jaw. "And the death record?" he prompted. Brother Malcolm hesitated, his ancient eyes lifting to meet Morella's for one brief, penetrating moment. "That is where matters grow. Curious, Your Majesty. The death was recorded 3 days after the birth, a tragedy common enough among newborns. Yet the usual attestations are missing. No midwife's mark, no physician's seal, only the signature of Lord Cedric, the child's father, and Your Majesty's own brother." A heavy silence fell across the hall. All eyes turned to Morella, who stood frozen in place, her heart thundering against her ribs. "Is that all you have brought us, old man?" the king demanded, an edge creeping into his voice. "No, Your Majesty." Brother Malcolm reached once more into his leather pouch. "There is one item more." The object he withdrew caught the light like a fallen star. A medallion of silver, exquisitely crafted, suspended from a delicate chain. Its face bore an intricate design, a falcon with spread wings clasping a sword in its talons, surrounded by a pattern of roses. "The personal seal of Lady Rosalind," the chronicler explained, holding it aloft for all to see. "Given to her child at birth, according to ancient custom. Recorded in the chronicles as having been buried with the infant princess." Lady Eleonora pushed forward from the crowd, her face flushed with excitement. "Yet it was not buried, was it? It was sent away with the living child, the child who stands before us now." The hall erupted in exclamations and urgent whispers. The king raised a hand for silence, but for once, his command went unheeded. The nobles of Thornwall had scented a scandal too delicious to ignore. "The medallion proves nothing," Queen Matilda declared, rising to her feet in a rustle of expensive silk. "Any trinket can be copied by a skilled silversmith. The girl is an impostor, seeking to exploit old rumors for her own advancement." "Let her prove it then," called a voice from the crowd. Baron Wulfric, one of the oldest nobles in the realm. "If she bears the royal medallion's twin, let us see it." All eyes turned expectantly to Morella, who could only shake her head. "I possess no such token," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the disappointed murmurs. The king's lips curved in the ghost of a triumphant smile. But before he could speak, the great doors burst open once more. A man strode into the hall, broad-shouldered and weather-beaten, with the rough hands of one who worked the land. His homespun clothing marked him as a commoner, yet he walked with the determination of one who would not be deterred by ceremony or protocol. "Thomas the Miller," gasped a kitchen maid near the back of the hall. "Morella's father. Foster father," corrected Lady Eleonora, loudly enough for many to hear. The miller paid no heed to the whispers that followed his progress. His eyes remained fixed on Morella, filled with a mixture of sorrow and resolution. When he reached her side, he dropped to one knee, not in deference to the king, but to bring himself level with the young woman he had raised. "Forgive me, child," he said, his rough voice thick with emotion. "I thought to protect you by keeping silence, but I see now that silence will only condemn you." From within his jerkin, he withdrew a small object wrapped in faded linen. The cloth fell away to reveal another medallion, identical to the one Brother Malcolm held, save for a jagged crack that nearly split it in two. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Queen Matilda half rose from her throne, her face suddenly pale beneath its careful paint. King Alaric's knuckles whitened against the carved arms of his seat. "It was given into my keeping," Thomas explained, loud enough for all to hear, "on the night a hooded woman brought a newborn babe to our door. Keep her safe," the woman said, "for there are those who would see her dead before claiming her birthright." He pressed the broken medallion into Morella's trembling hands. "This is yours by right, my girl, as is the truth of your birth." Morella stared at the silver piece, feeling its weight, the physical manifestation of a heritage she had never known, never sought. The falcon's eyes seemed to stare back at her, as if challenging her to accept what she had always been, beneath the humble garb and calloused hands. Brother Malcolm shuffled forward, holding out the medallion from his records. "Together," he said gently, "they will tell the tale that words cannot." With shaking fingers, Morella brought the two pieces together. The jagged edges aligned perfectly, two halves of a single whole. The broken medallion had been deliberately split, one half recorded in royal archives, the other sent with the child as irrefutable proof of identity, should the day of reckoning ever come. That day had arrived. "Impossible!" Queen Matilda's voice cut through the astonished silence. "This is some elaborate deception. The girl cannot be—" "My niece," King Alaric finished, rising slowly from his throne. His face had gone the color of old parchment, his eyes glittering with an emotion Morella could not name. "The daughter of my younger brother, Lord Cedric, and his wife, Lady Rosalind." A triumphant cry went up from several nobles, those who had championed Morella's cause from the beginning. Lady Eleanor's face shone with vindication, though her eyes held a calculating gleam that suggested her interest went beyond mere justice. But the queen was not finished. Sweeping down from the dais, she approached the ancient chronicler with the grace of a hunting cat. "You have shown us proof of the child's birth," she conceded, her voice honey-sweet yet laced with venom. "But tell me, Brother Malcolm, who were her mother's people? From what family did Lady Rosalind spring?" The old monk blinked in surprise. "Why, she was the youngest sister of the Duchess of Westmore, your own sister, Your Majesty." A shocked silence fell over the assembly. Queen Matilda's sister, which made Morella her niece by blood, as well as marriage. The queen's beautiful face contorted briefly before smoothing into a mask of practiced serenity. "How fascinating," she remarked, her voice deadly soft. "That this serving girl should appear from nowhere, bearing such convenient marks of royal birth, just as my son approaches marriageable age." Her implication hung in the air like poison. She was suggesting that Morella had orchestrated the entire revelation, perhaps with the help of ambitious nobles, to position herself as a potential bride for Prince Edward. Thomas the miller stepped forward, his honest face flushed with indignation. "My wife and I raised her as our own. We never told her of her birth, never. It was our promise to protect her, not to prepare her for some grand return." But the queen merely smiled, a cold curve of painted lips. A touching tale indeed. One might almost believe it, were the stakes not so very high. The king raised his hand, commanding silence once more. This time the hall obeyed, the tension palpable as all awaited his judgment. Would he acknowledge the evidence before him, or would loyalty to his queen sway his verdict? "The matter requires further investigation," he announced finally, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. "The girl will be kept under guard until the full truth, can be determined." As royal guards stepped forward to escort her away, Morella clutched the broken medallion to her chest. In the space of a morning, her entire world had shattered and reformed around her. She was no longer simply Morella the serving girl, but possibly Mirabella, Princess of Thornwall, a transformation as unbelievable as it was unwanted. For in the queen's cold eyes, she had seen not recognition or acceptance, but something far more dangerous, the glint of fear. And fear, in the deadly game of royal politics, was the surest path to elimination. A primera grande reviravolta. The dawn that broke over Thornwall 3 days later seemed unnaturally bright, as if the sun itself were straining to witness what would unfold in the castle's great courtyard. Since the revelation of the broken medallion, Morella had been confined to a chamber in the eastern tower. Not a dungeon, but not quite the quarters of an acknowledged princess either. Guards stood at her door day and night, ostensibly for her protection, though she harbored no illusions about their true purpose. The summons came with the morning bell, delivered by a stone-faced knight bearing the king's personal insignia. "You are to present yourself in the courtyard within the hour," he announced, his eyes carefully avoiding hers. "The king will make his final pronouncement regarding your status." Her simple dress had been replaced with a gown of pale blue silk, not quite as elaborate as those worn by the highest ladies of the court, but fine enough to mark her as someone of significance. As she was escorted down the winding staircase and through corridors lined with curious servants, Morella felt like a stranger in her own skin. The weight of the broken medallion, now hanging around her neck, seemed to increase with every step. The courtyard had been transformed overnight. A wooden platform draped in royal colors dominated the center, while benches arranged in concentric circles provided seating for what appeared to be every noble in the realm. Beyond them, pressing against hastily erected barriers, stood hundreds of commoners, farmers, merchants, blacksmiths, and millers who had traveled from villages near and far to witness the spectacle. Morella's heart contracted painfully when she glimpsed familiar faces among them, her foster sisters, Lily and Bess, their eyes wide with confusion and awe. Gareth the stablemaster, whose kindness had been her only comfort in those first difficult days at the castle. Even old Widow Thorne, clutching her herbs and muttering what might have been prayers or curses. As she was led to a solitary chair positioned before the platform, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Morella kept her eyes downcast, unable to bear the weight of so many stares. She felt exposed, vulnerable, a creature suspended between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. The trumpet's blare announced the royal party's arrival. King Alaric strode forth first, resplendent in ceremonial armor that gleamed like liquid silver in the morning light. Queen Matilda followed, her beauty enhanced rather than diminished by the hard glitter in her eyes. Prince Edward came last, his face carefully composed, though a muscle worked in his jaw, betraying inner tension. Behind them walked a procession of the realm's most powerful figures, Brother Malcolm, clutching his precious records, Baron Wulfric and other elder nobles, representatives from neighboring kingdoms, and, somewhat surprisingly, Thomas the miller, looking profoundly uncomfortable in new clothes that had clearly been provided for the occasion. The king took his position at the center of the platform, hands resting on the pommel of a ceremonial sword. When he spoke, his voice carried effortlessly to the furthest corners of the crowded courtyard. "People of Thornwall," he began, "for 3 days and nights I have consulted with my advisors, examined ancient records, and prayed for divine guidance in this most unusual matter." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembly. "The question before us is of grave importance to the stability and future of our realm. The true identity of this young woman who has, through extraordinary circumstances, captured the attention of court and kingdom alike." Morella felt a chill despite the warm morning air. The king's words were measured, diplomatic, yet beneath them lurked something cold and calculating that made her blood run cold. "Brother Malcolm," the king continued, "share with all what you have discovered in the royal archives." The ancient chronicler shuffled forward, unfurling a scroll that appeared newer than those he had presented previously. "I have examined records dating back 7 generations, he announced, his reedy voice carrying surprisingly well. "The birthmark in the shape of a crescent moon upon the left shoulder appears consistently among female descendants of the royal line through the maternal bloodline of the House of Westmore, including Lady Rosalind, sister to our queen." A murmur swept through the crowd. Queen Matilda's face remained impassive, though her fingers twitched against the fabric of her gown. "Furthermore," Brother Malcolm continued, "I have verified through multiple sources that on the night recorded as the death of the infant Princess Mirabella, a trusted servant of Lady Rosalind's household left the castle with a bundled package. This servant was later seen in the village of Oakvale." The king nodded gravely. "Thomas of Oakvale, step forward and tell what you know." Morella's foster father approached the edge of the platform, his weathered face solemn. 18 years ago, my wife and I were awakened in the night by a knocking at our door. A woman stood there, cloaked and hooded, bearing a newborn babe. This child must live in secret, she told us, for her own protection. She gave us the broken medallion as proof of the child's birth and promised that one day, when it was safe, someone would come for her. His voice broke slightly. That day never came. We raised the child as our own, loving her as our daughter in all but blood. A collective sigh passed through the crowd, many of the common folk openly weeping at the miller's simple eloquence. Even some of the nobles appeared moved, dabbing discreetly at their eyes with embroidered handkerchiefs. The king raised his hand for silence. "The evidence of birthmark and medallion is compelling, yet questions remain. Why was the princess spirited away? Who sought to harm her? And why reveal her existence now, after so many years of secrecy? He turned to face Morella directly. Rise, daughter of Thornwall, and face your king. On trembling legs, Morella stood. The silence of the courtyard pressed against her ears like physical weight. I have reached my decision, King Alaric announced. Based on all evidence presented, I acknowledge this woman as Princess Mirabella Eleonora Thornwall, daughter of my brother Lord Cedric and his wife Lady Rosalind, rightful heir to the Duchy of Northvale and true-born princess of the realm. A roar went up from the crowd. Relief, triumph, and excitement blending into a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very stones of the castle. Flowers were thrown from the commoners' section, landing in a colorful carpet around Morella's feet. Several nobles dropped to one knee, offering immediate fealty to the newly recognized princess. But Morella barely registered any of it. Her eyes remained fixed on the royal family, on the king's calculating expression, the queen's frozen smile, and most tellingly, Prince Edward's face, which reflected not joy, but growing concern. As the initial clamor began to subside, the king raised his hand once more. However, he continued, his voice cutting through the celebrations like a blade through silk, there is more to this tale than has yet been told. The crowd's jubilation faltered, uncertain murmurs replacing triumphant cheers. Morella felt her breath catch in her throat. What new twist awaited in this already impossible story? Prince Edward stepped forward suddenly, unrolling a parchment of his own. Father, if I may— You may not, the king interrupted, his voice sharp with authority. The prince has been conducting his own investigation, it seems, without royal permission, but I have uncovered what he sought to reveal. His gaze swept over the confused assembly. The reason Princess Mirabella was hidden away, the danger that threatened her infant life, came not from outside our borders, but from within the very heart of the royal family. Gasps and whispers erupted throughout the courtyard. Queen Matilda's face had gone deathly pale, her knuckles white against the arms of her chair. Records discovered in my late brother's private chambers, the king continued, reveal that Lady Rosalind uncovered a plot against the royal succession, a plot that would have seen my own son removed from his position as heir in favor of another claimant. Fearing for her child's safety should this knowledge become known, she arranged the deception of her daughter's death and secret fostering. The courtyard had grown so quiet that the flutter of banners in the morning breeze sounded thunderous by comparison. Every face was turned toward the king, every breath held in anticipation of what would come next. And who? King Alaric asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless carried to every corner. Who would benefit most from such a plot? Who would have reason to eliminate a child whose very existence complicated the succession? His gaze locked with his queen's. Something passed between them, a silent communication born of decades of marriage, politics, and shared secrets. But before the king could speak, the accusation hovering on his lips, an unexpected voice rang out from the crowd. I can answer that question, Your Majesty. Every head turned toward the source of the interruption. An elderly woman pushed her way forward, tall and straight-backed despite her advanced years, her silver hair bound in a simple coronet, her clothing rich but decades out of fashion. The Duchess of Westmore, someone gasped. The Queen's own mother. Queen Matilda half rose from her seat, her composure cracking visibly. Mother? What are you doing here? The Duchess ignored her daughter, continuing her stately progress until she stood directly before the king. I have remained silent for 18 years, she announced, her voice carrying the unmistakable resonance of noble birth. But I will not allow falsehood to become truth through repetition, no matter how convenient that falsehood might be for the crown. From within the folds of her cloak, she withdrew a sealed document, the wax impression bearing a crest that made Brother Malcolm gasp aloud. The personal seal of Lord Cedric himself, the old monk confirmed, his voice trembling with emotion. Thought lost these many years. Not lost, corrected the Duchess. Hidden, along with the truth it protects. Open it, Your Majesty, if you truly seek justice rather than convenient scapegoats. The king's face had darkened like a thundercloud, but with hundreds of witnesses watching, he had little choice. With controlled movements, he broke the seal and unfolded the yellowed parchment. As his eyes scanned the contents, The blood drained visibly from his face. "It cannot be," he whispered. The Duchess turned to face the breathlessly waiting crowd. "The document confirms what my daughter Rosalind discovered before her death, that the plot against the royal succession originated not with Queen Matilda, but with Lord Regent Aldrich himself, brother to the king and father to the child who now stands before you." The courtyard erupted in chaos. Nobles leapt to their feet, shouting questions and exclamations. Commoners pressed against the barriers, straining to understand the shocking revelation. Amidst it all, Morella stood frozen, the world tilting beneath her feet. Her father, the man she had never known, had been plotting against his own brother. Had her mother died to protect this terrible secret? As guards struggled to restore order, Prince Edward made his way to Morella's side, his face grim with purpose. "Come with me," he urged, his voice low and urgent. "Now, while they're distracted. This revelation has made your position more dangerous, not less." A segunda grande reviravolta e climax. Chaos reigned in the courtyard of Thornwall Castle. Nobles shouted over one another, their faces flushed with outrage or calculation, depending on which faction they belonged to. Common folk pushed against the barriers, some trying to get closer to the unfolding drama, others attempting to flee what threatened to become a dangerous situation. Guards struggled to maintain order, their hands nervously gripping sword hilts as the crowd's mood grew increasingly volatile. Through this maelstrom, Prince Edward guided Morella with a firm hand at her elbow. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, alert for any sign of immediate threat. They had nearly reached one of the side passages leading back into the castle when a voice cut through the din like a blade. "The princess will remain where she is." Queen Matilda stood at the edge of the royal platform, her regal composure restored despite the shocking accusations that had just been leveled against her late brother-in-law. Her ice-blue eyes fixed on Morella with an intensity that seemed to physically halt their progress. "These are serious matters that cannot be settled by flight or secrecy," the Queen continued, her melodic voice somehow carrying over the tumult. "We have had enough of shadows and whispers. Let the truth stand in the light, regardless of how painful it may prove." Prince Edward's grip on Morella's arm tightened fractionally. "She speaks of truth while weaving new deceptions," he murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Be wary." The king, who had remained stunned into silence by the Duchess's revelation, now seemed to shake himself from his stupor. "Indeed," he agreed, though his eyes held a wariness when they turned toward his wife. "We will get to the heart of this matter here and now, before all witnesses." With a sharp gesture, he summoned the captain of his guard. "Clear the center of the courtyard. Maintain order, but let all who wish to bear witness remain." As the guards hustled to comply, rearranging the shocked nobles and pressing the common folk back to a respectful distance, Morella found herself once more at the center of attention. Prince Edward had been firmly but politely separated from her side, taking his place once more on the royal platform, though his expression made it clear he did so under protest. "Duchess," the king addressed the elderly woman who had thrown the court into upheaval, "you claim that this document proves my brother plotted against the succession, against his own nephew, my son." The Duchess of Westmore inclined her silver head. "The document speaks for itself, Your Majesty." "It is a letter written in Lord Cedric's own hand, confessing his involvement in a conspiracy to place himself on the throne, bypassing Prince Edward's claim. My daughter discovered this treasonous plot and confronted him with it on the very night she gave birth to their child." A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Even those who had championed Morella's cause looked uncertain now, eyeing her with newfound suspicion as the daughter of a traitor. "And what became of my brother?" the king demanded, though something in his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "He took his own life that very night," the Duchess replied, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. Unable to face the shame of discovery, he fell upon his sword in his private chambers. It was recorded as a tragic accident to spare the family further scandal. Queen Matilda stepped forward, her silk skirts rustling like autumn leaves. "And my sister? What of Rosalind?" For the first time, the Duchess's composure faltered. "She died 3 days later, of childbed fever, the physicians claimed, though some whispered of a broken heart. But before she passed, She extracted a promise from me that her newborn daughter would be hidden away, protected from the taint of her father's treason, until such time as she could reclaim her birthright without shame. All eyes turned to Morella, who stood transfixed by this tale of parents she had never known. A traitor father and a mother who had died protecting her from his legacy. The weight of their choices, their sins and sacrifices, pressed upon her shoulders like a physical burden. A convenient story, the king remarked, his voice carefully neutral. But it still does not explain why this matter has surfaced now after 18 years of silence. The Duchess opened her mouth to respond, but a new voice rang out across the courtyard, high and clear and filled with absolute conviction. Because it is a lie. All of it. The crowd parted like water around a stone as a young woman strode forward. She was perhaps 2 or 3 years older than Morella, dressed in a traveling cloak of fine but road-worn wool. Her hair, a rich chestnut brown, was bound in a simple braid, and her face, though smudged with dust from the road, bore a striking resemblance to the portrait of Lady Rosalind that hung in the great hall. "Who dares interrupt these proceedings?" demanded the king, though his face had gone ashen. The newcomer dropped into a curtsy that somehow managed to be both technically correct and subtly mocking. "Forgive me, uncle. I am Eleanor Thornwall, daughter of Lord Cedric and Lady Rosalind, the true Princess of Thornwall and Duchess of Northvale by right of birth." A shocked silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by scattered gasps and the distant cry of a falcon circling overhead. Morella felt the ground shift beneath her feet, as if the very stones of the castle were trying to shake her from their surface. Another claimant? Another young woman insisting she was the lost princess? "Impossible," breathed the Duchess of Westmore, her aged face pale with shock. "My granddaughter died with her mother. I attended both funerals myself." "Did you see the child's body?" challenged the newcomer, her chin lifting in defiance. "Or merely a closed coffin, conveniently small, while the living infant was spirited away to protect her from those who wished her dead?" Queen Matilda descended from the platform in a whisper of silk, approaching the young woman with narrowed eyes. She circled her slowly, examining her features with the intensity of a jeweler assessing a questionable gem. "She has Cedric's mouth," the queen admitted reluctantly, "and something of Rosalind's bearing." "But the birthmark," protested Prince Edward, speaking for the first time since the new arrival's appearance. "The crescent moon that marks the female line of Westmore, Morella bears it upon her shoulder. We have all seen the proof." The young woman who called herself Eleonora smiled thinly. "A convenient mark indeed. One that can be created with careful application of certain herbs over time, as any skilled herbalist could tell you." She turned her gaze directly to Morella, who felt the blood drain from her face at the accusation. "This impostor may have fooled you all with her pretty tale and false mark, but she cannot produce what I carry." From beneath her cloak, she withdrew a gleaming object, a medallion identical to the broken one that hung around Morella's neck, but whole and unblemished. "The true royal medallion," she announced, holding it aloft for all to see. "Given to me by my mother as she lay dying, with instructions to keep it safe until I was old enough to reclaim my birthright." Brother Malcolm shuffled forward, his rheumy eyes wide with confusion. "But the records clearly show the medallion was broken in two, one half buried with the child, the other preserved in the royal archives." "A clever deception," Eleonora replied smoothly. "A false medallion, broken for dramatic effect, while the true token remained intact with its rightful owner." The crowd's attention swung between the two young women like a pendulum, Morella with her broken medallion and crescent birthmark, Eleonora with her whole token and aristocratic bearing. Uncertainty hung in the air, thick enough to cut with a blade. King Alaric descended from the platform, his face thunderous. "Enough of these games. If you are truly my brother's daughter, why have you waited until this precise moment to make your claim? Why not come forward when you reached adulthood?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "Because I was told to wait for a sign, that when the time was right my path would be cleared. When news reached me of a serving girl who had tamed an untamable horse and was now claiming to be the lost princess, I knew my moment had come." "A convenient explanation," the king retorted, "but hardly proof." "Then let the proof be this," Eleonora declared, stepping forward to place her medallion beside the broken one hanging from Mirella's neck. "See how mine catches the light? Pure silver of royal quality, whereas this broken trinket—" She lifted Mirella's medallion with disdainful fingers. "Good enough to fool those who wish to be fooled, but clearly of lesser make. A miller's copy of a royal heirloom." Doubt rippled through the assembly. Thomas the miller stepped forward, his honest face creased with distress. "I swear by all that's holy, the medallion was given to us just as I described. We never sought to deceive anyone." "Perhaps you yourself were deceived," suggested Eleonora, not unkindly. "A pawn in someone else's greater game." Confusion and uncertainty had replaced the earlier triumph in the faces of those who had championed Mirella's cause. Even the Duchess of Westmore looked shaken, her aged eyes darting between the two young women as if trying to discern some hidden truth. In the midst of this chaos, a sound cut through the babble of voices, a shrill neigh that silenced the entire courtyard. Thunder's fury had broken free from the royal stables, galloping into the open space with mane flying and eyes wild. Guards scattered before him, nobles shrank back in alarm, and commoners pressed against the barriers in terror. The great stallion circled the courtyard once, hooves striking sparks from the cobblestones, before coming to an abrupt halt before the two young women. His massive head swung between them, nostrils flaring as he seemed to assess each in turn. Then, with a grace that belied his enormous size, he sank to his knees before Mirella. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The horse that no one but Mirella had been able to tame was making his own judgment, recognizing something in her that transcended medallions and birthmarks, documents and declarations. "Animals can be trained?" Eleonora insisted, though her voice had lost some of its confidence. "This proves nothing." But the damage was done. The simple, undeniable gesture had rekindled doubt in the minds of all who witnessed it. If this was a deception, it went beyond what any human could orchestrate. As Thunder's fury rose and allowed Mirella to place a gentle hand upon his muzzle, the commoners began to murmur her name. Softly at first, then with growing conviction, the chant spread through their ranks. "Mirella, Mirella, Mirella," not Princess Mirabella or Your Highness, but the simple name of the miller's daughter who had shown kindness when none was expected of her, who had faced humiliation with dignity, who had connected with a wild creature in a way that defied explanation. The nobles remained silent, uncertain which way the political winds would blow. The king's face was unreadable as he observed the growing fervor of the common folk. Only Prince Edward moved, stepping down from the platform to stand beside Mirella and the great horse. "I have watched this unfold from the beginning," he declared, his voice carrying across the hushed courtyard. "And I stake my honor as heir to the throne on this truth. Whether she was born Princess Mirabella or simply Mirella of Oakvale matters less than what she has proven herself to be, a person of courage, dignity, and true nobility of spirit." The king stepped forward, his expression grave as he prepared to pronounce his final judgment on this extraordinary matter. Resolution immorale de historia. A hush fell over the courtyard as King Alaric took a single step forward. The weight of judgment hung in the air, pressing down upon Mirella's shoulders as she stood with one hand still resting on Thunder's Fury's powerful neck. The great stallion remained unnaturally calm beside her, his presence lending her strength even as her world teetered on the edge of an abyss. The king's eyes, shrewd, calculating, and weary with the burden of power, moved between Mirella and the woman called Eleonora. His face betrayed nothing of his thoughts, though the muscle working in his jaw suggested internal struggle. "Two women," he said at last, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent courtyard. "Two medallions. Two stories, each compelling in its own way. How is a king to judge between them?" Queen Matilda stepped to her husband's side, her silk skirts whispering against the stones. "The matter seems clear enough," she murmured, though her voice carried in the stillness. "The newcomer brings an unbroken medallion and a face that bears the stamp of royal blood. The serving girl offers only a broken token and the affection of a horse." Eleonora's lips curved in a triumphant smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something brittle in her posture now, a tension that hadn't been there before Thunder's Fury made his unexpected judgment. Prince Edward opened his mouth to object, but before he could speak, Morella herself stepped forward. Something had shifted within her during these tumultuous days, a quiet strength taking root where uncertainty had flourished. When she spoke, her voice was clear and steady, carrying to every ear despite its gentleness. "Your Majesty," she said, addressing not just the king but all assembled, "I have listened to tales of my supposed birth and heritage until I scarcely know my own name anymore. I've been called daughter of a miller and daughter of a trader, serving girl and princess." She touched the broken medallion at her throat. "I've been given tokens of a past I cannot remember and burdened with expectations I never sought." A murmur passed through the crowd, not disapproval, but something closer to wonder at the simple dignity in her words. "But through it all," Morella continued, "one truth has remained constant. I am the woman I have always been. My hands still bear the calluses of honest work. My heart still holds the values taught to me by Thomas and Anna Miller, who raised me with love and kindness." She gazed directly at the king, unflinching. "Those things, my work, my heart, the lessons of those who loved me, these are the only birthright I can claim with absolute certainty." Thomas the miller wiped tears from his weathered cheeks, pride shining in his eyes despite his evident grief at the thought of losing his daughter to a royal heritage. Morella turned next to face Eleonora, who stiffened under her direct gaze. "If you are indeed the true-born princess," she said, "then I wish you joy of it. Titles and lands mean nothing to me compared to living with honor and truth." The courtyard remained utterly silent. Even the birds seemed to have paused their songs to witness this extraordinary moment. "You would surrender your claim so easily?" Eleonora asked, disbelief evident in her voice. "After coming so far?" Morella shook her head slowly. "I make no claim to surrender. I never sought a crown or title, only the freedom to live without shame or fear. If being recognized as Princess Mirabella would bring peace to this kingdom, I would accept the burden. But if my presence brings only division and doubt, then I would rather return to the simple life I have always known." From the crowd of nobles, Lady Eleonora, the king's cousin who had first whispered suspicions about Morella's true identity, pushed forward, her face flushed with emotion. "This is absurd. No true-born royal would speak of titles as burdens or surrender their birthright so casually. This only proves she is an impostor." But to everyone's surprise, it was the Duchess of Westmore who responded, her aged voice cutting through the lady's protests. "On the contrary," the elderly woman said, "it proves she has the wisdom that has so often been lacking in our family line." Her rheumy eyes turned to Eleonora with newfound suspicion. "A true princess understands that nobility lies not in demanding recognition, but in placing the welfare of the realm above personal ambition." King Alaric raised his hand for silence, his expression contemplative. "Perhaps there is a way to determine the truth once and for all." He turned to Brother Malcolm. "The records speak of a unique birthmark borne by the female line of Westmore, a crescent moon upon the left shoulder. We have seen that Morella bears such a mark. Let us see if our new claimant does as well." Eleonora's face paled visibly. "My lord, such a public examination would be most improper. My daughter will have nothing to fear from confirming her identity," interrupted the Duchess, her keen eyes never leaving Eleonora's face, "unless, of course, there is something she wishes to hide." Trapped by her own claims, Eleonora had no choice but to acquiesce. Queen Matilda herself led her behind a hastily arranged screen where, sheltered from public view, the examination could take place with proper dignity. When the Queen emerged moments later, her face was a mask of controlled fury. "There is no mark," she announced, her voice brittle with disappointment. "Not even a suggestion of one." The crowd erupted in exclamations of shock and outrage. Guards immediately surrounded Eleonora, who no longer bothered to maintain her royal bearing. Her face twisted with thwarted ambition. "You fools," she spat, so easily swayed by sentiment and superstition. "That girl is no more a princess than I am, just a lucky servant who caught the eye of a lovesick prince." "Who are you?" the king demanded, his voice deadly quiet. "Speak the truth now, or face consequences far worse than mere embarrassment." For a moment it seemed the woman might continue her defiance. Then, as quickly as a snuffed candle, her resistance crumbled. "My name is Marian," she admitted, her shoulders slumping. Daughter of a minor lord from the eastern provinces. I was approached 3 months ago by certain interested parties who thought my resemblance to the royal line might prove useful. Her eyes flicked briefly toward several nobles who were now attempting to distance themselves from the unfolding disaster. I was promised wealth and position if I could discredit the miller's daughter and claim the heritage for myself. "And the medallion?" prompted the Duchess, her voice sharp with anger. "The perfect unbroken medallion that you claimed proved your identity?" Marion's laugh was hollow. "A clever forgery, commissioned from a silversmith in the capital. Good enough to fool most eyes, especially when presented with confidence." Guards led the disgraced impostor away, along with several nobles whose expressions of alarm confirmed their involvement in the plot. The king watched them go, his face grim with the promise of justice to come. In the wake of this revelation, all eyes returned to Morella, who stood calm at the center of the storm. The commoners had begun to chant her name again, this time joined by many of the nobles who recognized which way the wind now blew. King Alaric approached her slowly, his expression inscrutable. "It seems, niece, that you are indeed who the evidence claimed. Daughter of my brother Cedric and his wife Rosalind, rightful Princess of Thornwall and Duchess of North Vale." Morella inclined her head in acknowledgement, neither embracing nor rejecting the title. "I stand ready to serve the realm as your majesty deems best," she replied simply. The king studied her for a long moment, something like respect kindling in his eyes. "You speak of service rather than privilege," he observed. "A rare perspective among those born to rank." "I was not raised to privilege," Morella reminded him gently. "And perhaps that is the greatest gift my foster parents gave me, to know the worth of simple things. Honest work, loyal friends, and a life lived with integrity." A new silence fell over the courtyard. Not the tense, expectant hush of before, but something deeper and more contemplative. Even the most jaded courtiers seemed touched by the simple wisdom in her words. Prince Edward moved to stand beside her, his expression open and unguarded for the first time since the proceedings began. "Father," he said, his voice clear and carrying, "I believe we have all witnessed something extraordinary today. Not just the unmasking of a deception, but the revelation of a truth far more valuable than bloodlines or birthrights." The king nodded slowly, his decision crystallizing in his eyes. "Indeed." He turned to address the assembled crowd, his voice ringing with authority. "People of Thornwall, today we have looked to documents and medallions, birthmarks and physical resemblances to determine the truth of Princess Mirabella's identity. But in doing so, we nearly overlooked the most compelling evidence of all, the character she has displayed throughout this ordeal." He gestured toward Morella, who stood tall despite her simple origins and the weight of recent revelations. "This young woman has shown courage in the face of humiliation, dignity in the face of accusation, and wisdom in the face of temptation. Are these not the very qualities we would hope to find in one of royal blood?" The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelmingly affirmative. Cheers erupted from commoners and nobles alike, a spontaneous outpouring of support that seemed to shake the very foundations of the castle. As the acclaim gradually subsided, the king turned back to Morella. "The decision now rests with you, niece. Will you accept your birthright and the responsibilities that come with it? Or would you choose to return to the life you have known?" Morella glanced at Thomas the miller, whose eyes shone with tears of mingled pride and sorrow. She looked at Prince Edward, whose expression held something far deeper than mere royal interest. She felt Thunder's fury shift beside her, a steady presence in a world turned upside down. When she finally spoke, her voice carried not just through the courtyard but seemed to echo across the kingdom itself. "I cannot deny what blood flows in my veins," she said, "nor would I dishonor the mother who gave her life to protect mine. But neither can I forget the lessons taught to me by those who raised me with love." She straightened her shoulders, decision made. "I will accept my heritage not as a claim to privilege, but as a call to service, a chance to bridge two worlds that have remained too long divided." The wisdom in her answer resonated through the crowd, rippling outward in waves of newfound respect. Even Queen Matilda, who had regarded her with such suspicion, inclined her head in reluctant acknowledgement. In the days that followed, tales of the miller's daughter who became a princess spread throughout the realm, not just the drama of revelation and impostor unmasked, but the deeper story of a young woman who had tamed not only a wild horse, but the wild forces of ambition and pride that so often corrupted those born to power. For in the end, the true nobility that won the hearts of Thornwall lay not in Morella's royal blood or the crescent birthmark upon her shoulder, but in the dignity with which she had faced humiliation and the wisdom with which she understood that titles and crowns meant nothing compared to a life lived with honor and compassion. And when, a year later, she stood beside Prince Edward to pledge their lives together, both commoners and nobles alike recognized that Thornwall had gained not just a princess restored to her rightful place, but a leader whose greatest strength lay in remembering what it meant to serve rather than be served, a lesson far more valuable than any royal heritage could bestow. What makes us truly noble? Is it the blood that flows through our veins, the titles we inherit by chance of birth, or the character we forge through our choices when faced with cruelty and injustice? Morella's journey reminds us that true dignity isn't found in crowns or castles, but in the courage to remain true to ourselves when the world demands we bend or break. Perhaps the most royal quality of all is the wisdom to value compassion over power and service over privilege. Consider what you would have done in Morella's place. Would you have grasped at royal birthright with both hands, letting the power wash away memories of a simpler life? Or would you have found the strength to remember where you came from, using your newfound position to bridge worlds that had long been divided? Sometimes our greatest strength lies not in what we claim for ourselves, but in what we choose to give to others. If this tale of unexpected courage and true nobility touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who might need a reminder that we are defined not by our circumstances, but by how we face them. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that illuminate the human spirit, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts on what true nobility means to you. After all, the most powerful stories are the ones we carry with us long after the telling is done.